Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt Leader within. Now, many of you have probably read my latest book, Black Belt Secrets of Success. Debuted in April of 2024, and it has been a phenomenal opportunity to reach into the lives of a number of people and literally have an opportunity to share stages around the world to share excerpts from that book. Now, when I was researching that book to put that together, I spent a lot of time studying and examining the lives of very successful people all throughout history. Now, in the book, I highlight 11 common success traits that each of these individuals possessed, and they utilized those common traits of success to drive their own success efforts and to enjoy the results of their labor. Now, the first and probably the most important of those 11 success traits can be summarized in a single sentence. Successful people do daily what unsuccessful people do sometimes or not at all. Now, while I was doing my research, here's something I found that was interesting. Many of these successful people all throughout history were not the scholarly experts that you would probably think they should be if they were going to be named as one of the most successful people of all time. Think about some of the greatest names that you ever imagined in being highly successful, and you might be surprised as to their origin story. Take Thomas Edison, for example. Thomas Edison had only a few months of formal education in public school, but Thomas Edison went on to become perhaps the most prolific inventor of all times. Last time I checked, he was still number one in terms of patents held, 1,093 U.S. patents, and literally hundreds of foreign patents to his credit. Now, another successful name that you may think of is Albert Einstein, perhaps one of the most brilliant academians of all time. But you may not know that Albert Einstein faced significant academic struggles all throughout the early part of his life. His teachers, get this, his teachers doubted his potential. They said he lacked the aptitude for conventional learning. He never graduated high school. Think about that. The man that discovered relativity never graduated high school. But he ultimately went on to earn a PhD from the University of Zurich in 1905. Now, interestingly enough, thinking about that theory of relativity that Einstein created, he didn't create that theory while he was in college. He created that theory while working as a patent clerk. Now, Stephen Jobs, you may know the name from the Apple empire. He's considered a pioneer in what we would refer to today as microcomputer revolution, taking these big, massive computers that my dad literally had to crawl into to reprogram when he worked in the Army to being these small devices that literally sit on our desk or fit in our pocket in the 1970s and then the 1980s. But Stephen Jobs, to his credit, did all of that with only a single semester of college to his credit. Now, this man went on to co-found Apple, and he oversaw the introduction of the Macintosh computer, the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad, just to name a few of the incredible things that Stephen Jobs brought to the table. Now, going back in history a little further back, literary great Charles Dickens dropped out of high school at a very early age because he had to help support his poverty-stricken family. Likewise, Mark Twain, again, one of the greatest authors to ever live, had no formal education beyond elementary school. Instead, he chose to be a typewriter or a typesetter in a print shop. Ray Bradbury, I'm a science fiction nut and I love science fiction, and Ray Bradbury is a name you think of in the science fiction genre. But even though he's an icon in the science fiction industry, he suffered from dyslexia and struggled in school. Now, he did manage to squeak through high school, but he never went to college. He chose instead to educate himself at the library, teaching himself to read. He later became, in his words, a self-proclaimed library graduate. Now, when you think about other famous writers and authors and people that have penned these incredible works of art that we continue to read today, people like Jack London, Horatio Alger Jr., F. Scott Fitzgerald, all of those were dropouts who didn't finish school. The founder of Virgin Group, the billionaire Richard Branson, he also struggled with dyslexia and ADHD, and he dropped out of school at the age of 15, frustrated, disillusioned, and struggling just to get by to start a magazine. Well, years later, Branson is now sending rockets into outer space and has a diverse empire and is worth billions of dollars. He credits his diverse, successful career as his formal education. Now, Walt Disney, a name that is synonymous with Disneyland, Disney World, and Mickey Mouse, Walt Disney dropped out of high school at the age of 16 to join the U.S. Army. He was turned down because he was underage, but he was able to get a position in the Red Cross. He served as an ambulance driver in France. From there, he went on into the newspaper business and was fired from his first newspaper job for, get this, lacking creativity. Now, several banks, matter of fact, over 300 banks refused to fund and finance Walt Disney's concept for Disneyland before he finally found a financial backer. Don't you think those banks wish they could have gone back and maybe rethought their decision not to fund that opportunity? Well, let's keep going. Benjamin Franklin, a name we know from the origins of the United States and one of the incredible key players in the early founding of our country. Ben dropped out of high school at the age of 10. He went to work as a soap and candle maker. He went on to found the very first independent newspaper in the fledgling United States colonies. Now, Franklin, like Edison, was a prolific inventor. He was a shrewd human behavior student, loved to understand how people think, how they act, and how to understand the nuances of influencing and manipulating people. Utilizing that talent, he demonstrated his political genius as a U.S. ambassador. Now, this begs the question, John, why are you talking about all of these people from history, and what does that have to do with today's leadership lesson? Well, I'm glad you asked. So here's the question I want to answer. What did all these historical figures have in common besides being failures and dropouts? Every single one of them, and countless more I could name, taught themselves how to learn. Not what to learn, but how to learn. And there's a big difference between the two. So now I want to go back into your history and think about when you were first born. You had a lot of how to thinking you had to develop. You were taught how to learn by your parents. Through trial and error, we learned how to crawl. We learned how to sit up. We learned how to stand. We ultimately learned how to take those first few staggering steps and then start walking. As toddlers, we learned to feed ourselves, to dress ourselves. We learned how to talk. We learned how to read letters and numbers and colors. We learned how to use a pencil. We learned how to use crayons. We learned how to use markers and maybe messed up a few of mom and dad's walls along the way. But life and our parents were our teachers back then in those early formative years of our life. And what we found as we explored the world around us, the world around us taught us much because we were constantly curious. We were open to learn. And as a result of that, life, our parents, and all the experience that we went through became our teachers. And then around the ages of 5 or 6, everything changed. Our parents sent us off to school. And at that moment, how we learned shifted to what we learned. Now think about what I just said. At the moment that we entered the public school system, the private school system, whatever it may be, our world changed in a moment. We were no longer taught how to learn, but we were taught what to learn. Because if you look at the education system that we have today, really unchanged going back over 200 years, for the most part, it is a passive experience of being lectured and being required to memorize and regurgitate facts and figures. Look at the testing systems that we've had for over 200 years in our country. Mainly, if not exclusively, students today are tested based upon their ability to regurgitate what they've been asked to memorize, learning available information. And then from there, it gets even worse. We go on to college or we go on to VOTEC, and there we are indoctrinated in a specific field of study. The focus, again, is on what learning, not how learning. We choose a field of study, business, science, math, the arts, whatever it may be, and then we are indoctrinated in a course of learning based upon not how to learn that information, but what we need to know to successfully earn a degree or a certification. Now, I want you to think about that. Upon graduation, we enter the workforce. We join an organization that teaches us what is required to successfully fill our duties, our obligations, and our responsibilities so we can remain employed and draw a paycheck each and every week. So most of us end up spending the rest of our lives living in a world of what? Completely unaware that another world exists. We lived in that world in our childhood, but we left it for a world that has left us limiting our potential and not really rising to become all that we can be. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the limitless world of how. Now, how thinking is different than what thinking. And for several years in the public education system, think about it. You go through 12 years of primary education, another 4 to 8, maybe 12 in secondary education. It's all what thinking. How thinking refers to the process of thinking itself. It's not simply thinking about this, that, or something else, or thinking about available facts and figures. What thinking is simply the transfer of information. And there's a huge difference between the two. How thinking is active, what thinking is passive. Now, one of the defining characteristics of the successful historical characters that I was talking about at the beginning of today's lesson is the fact that almost every single one of those individuals struggled with traditional what learning. But, and it's a big but, they thrived at how thinking. You know, what thinking is limited because it's based upon the available information to us. But it's how thinking that moves us beyond the boundaries of the available information, the what is information, to consider, to be curious about, and to postulate and wonder what could be. How thinking transforms what thinking to an entirely different level. So to me, that begs the question, how do you learn how to learn? Well, let me take you quickly on a well, not a deep dive, but let's take a little short deep dive into neuroscience and the human brain. Now, when you think about this incredible device that sits between our ears, it is perhaps the most complex device ever created. Not even the greatest supercomputer created today can do what our brain does. Our brain is virtually limitless. The only limits we have on our brain are the limits we place on ourselves. Now, the average brain weighs somewhere around 3 pounds. It's made up of about 60% fat, and the remaining 40% is water, carbohydrates, and some salts. Now, we dig inside the brain, and what we find is the brain contains some 100 billion neurons. Now, that's about the same as the number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. That's a lot of neurons. That's a lot of neural connections in our brain. Now, these neurons are connected together by trillions and trillions of synapses. These little connection points form what is referred to as a neuron forest in our brain. And it's through that neuron forest that electrical impulses can flow. It's how thoughts move from one part of our brain to another. It's how our sensory input gets to the thinking and the subconscious parts of our brain. Now, our brain runs on electricity, and if we could plug it into a wall or plug a device into it, our brain on its own generates enough power to light a 25-watt light bulb. Every time our heart beats, 20 to 25% of the blood that leaves our heart flows to the brain. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and here's the connection I want you to make. The brain that you and I have is constantly changing. It's not fixed from birth. It is constantly changing to our environment and to the experiences that we are experiencing every single day of our lives. This is a process known in science as neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to adapt, to respond, to adjust, and to rewire itself. Our brain continually produces new neurons throughout our entire life. Think about that. Our brain is constantly wiring and rewiring as we learn new information, we uncover new things, we ponder what is, we look at different ways of doing things. As long as we're learning and growing, our brain is learning and growing as well. And as we continue to produce these new neurons in our brain, we're essentially rewiring our brain over and over again as we acquire new experiences, new information, and we continue to ask ourselves, what could be? Now, did you get that? The brain isn't static. It's not fixed. It doesn't mean you've got to a point of learning and you can't learn anything new. That's a lie we tell ourselves. Our brain, according to Jim Quick, one of the foremost authorities of brain learning in the world, is literally limitless. Think about that. Our brain is capable of learning even as we get older. We have the ability to do so much more than we are capable of doing if only we're willing to open our mind and become curious. Now, I want you to think about one of the common traits of the historical characters that I talked about at the beginning of today's training, today's teaching. Most of them lived what I call curious lives. And it is that curiosity that is the gateway that opens the door to how thinking and how learning. Many of the individuals that I named early on in our time today, despite formal education, they educated themselves. They were self-learners going on a journey of discovery, and that journey continued their entire lives. Now, how did they do that? They focused on reading and learning through the various experiences that they encountered. Their curiosity to seek to understand what could be led them on a lifelong journey of discovery, and that opened the doorway to the incredible success that they experienced. Now, there's a lesson there for you and I to learn, and if we get nothing outside of today's teaching, it's this: we've got to remain curious, because curiosity is at the heart of how thinking. How thinking is about learning what is not known. It's about thinking about what we already know and then moving past what we know to seek to discover what is yet unknown. I think about the opening to Star Trek, space, the final frontier, the mission of the Starship Enterprise, to boldly go where no man was gone before. It was a series based upon curiosity. And as a result of that, it developed a fan following of people that began to do this out of the box how thinking. Now, interestingly enough, when we delve into neuroscience and we begin to look at what curiosity does to the brain, it's fascinating. And again, it's at the heart of how thinking and really learning how to learn. When we engage in a state of curiosity in our brain, it activates the parts of our brain that are responsible for memory, for learning, for reward, and motivation. Now, think about why those are necessary for success. We've got to learn what nobody else can learn, and we've got to figure out how to do what nobody else can do. We've got to be rewarded, even though we're going to fail multiple times before we discover something new. But as we begin to learn new things, we begin to be motivated to continue to dig deeper and learn even more. Now, interestingly enough, when we look at curiosity and its impact on the brain, when we're curious, it helps us to learn better, especially so when we're passionate about a subject. Now, go back and think about the people I talked about and the lives that they lived and the curiosity that they had. Thomas Edison was curious about a lot of things. He was passionate about the light bulb, about the motion picture devices that he created, about the mimeograph and all of the different things that he invented. Mark Twain was curious about the human experience and sharing colloquialisms and help people understand a way of life. Ben Franklin was curious. He looked at how do we help correct eyesight when it goes bad? Again, how thinking. History is full of men and women using curiosity to get passionate about a subject and going deeper that allow them to do what nobody else has ever been able to do. And that is one of the reasons they remain successful. Curiosity reduces the uncertainty of what if. That tends to hold us back and limit us. What could go wrong? What if this happens? What if that happens? And it shifts the conversation. Well, what if this happens? Then what? What if this happens? Then what? It changes the conversation because why? Curiosity encourages the seeking out of new information, and it challenges us to look for insights and to delve through and dig through what's not working to discover what is yet unlearned to figure out what could work in that situation. Now, interestingly enough, curiosity also helps solidify our memories. It spawns growth of new neurons, again, the rewiring of the brain. And as we remain curious and learn new things, and those neurons are continually being rewired and added, what are we doing? We are expanding the capacity of our brain. Again, brain expert Jim Quick refers to this as being limitless. Now, there's another common trait of the successful people that I've talked about that we're looking at today throughout history. It's the fact that they start and they end their day with reading. Now, think about that. They engage in the 3 R's of learning. And that's really where I wanted to get to today, the 3 R's of learning. Because the 3 R's of learning that these successful people, for the most part, implemented into their daily routine help lead them to success. Now, again, going back to the premise in the book Black Belt Secrets of Success, successful people do daily what unsuccessful people do sometimes or not at all. John Maxwell says the secret to your success is found in your daily routine. So let me introduce you to the 3 R's of learning and give you an opportunity to learn a success formula that can open up your mind to how thinking and give you an opportunity to stretch yourself and to rise to your full potential and to quit living a limited life and start living a limitless life. Now, President Harry Truman once said this. He said, "Not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers." Now, I 100% agree with that statement because you can't lead yourself and you can't lead other people where you yourself have not gone. So why is reading such a valuable tool for leadership, for personal growth, and to have the opportunity to live a limitless life, to have an opportunity to go beyond the boundaries of what is and step into the realm of what could be? Successful people throughout history have used reading as a means to learn. So what are they learning from reading? They're learning what they do not yet know. They're remaining curious as they read information from other people about what else could be out there that they don't know. Reading opens the doorway to learning, and there's always something new to learn if you're open and willing to do so. When we read, we have the opportunity and the privilege to glean the wisdom and the insights of other people, successful and unsuccessful, and the lessons life taught them. And when we learn those lessons, guess what? We're learning something new. We're learning how to apply something in our life maybe we haven't applied or experienced before. Successful people are also not just avid readers of books, they're avid readers of humanity and the human experience. Plato was an incredible student of human behavior and human experience. Ben Franklin was another of those that was an incredible student of human behavior and human experience. Many, many people throughout history have been great, successful people because they're not just readers of books, they're readers of people. Now, what do I mean by that? Through observing people, through what we read about their lives and what we see in the people living today, we learn how successful people deal with struggles, deal with challenges, how they deal with adversity. But from that, we also learn to recognize how they respond to both success and failure. And when we can glean that information and apply it to our own learning, we begin to stretch and understand there is more to learn and there is more out there for us to do. Successful people throughout history have used reading as an opportunity to see something and learn something new every single day. These successful people throughout history have viewed each day as an opportunity to learn, to experience, to discover, or to develop something new in their learning. They remain lifelong students of learning. It's that journey to black belt that we talked about, and I've talked about for years, and I speak to it in my book, Black Belt Leadership 101. When you get to black belt, you have not arrived. You've worked, you've been diligent, you've made your way through all the different colors that are there in the ranking system of martial arts. But when you get to black belt, at that point, you have not arrived and there's nothing more to learn. You have just now become a serious student. There are 10 levels of black belt, and it literally takes, in traditional martial arts, your entire life to get there. And the individuals that founded the martial arts that have passed that system on generation to generation, at their death would tell you, I haven't learned it all, but I passed on what I learned to the students I've trained so they can continue to journey to learn what is yet to be learned. That is at the essence of how thinking and learning that there is no finish line to life. Now, reading is fundamental to how thinking, and I want to spend a minute here because I want to give you again an action plan for today. Studies at the National Institute of Health and a number of other organizations that study brain health and looking at the brain itself, here's what they found. The brain can only focus on effectively learning new information for somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour. And after that, the brain begins to struggle to effectively learn. An NIH study in particular found that optimal learning takes place in 20 to 30-minute windows. Now, hear me when I say this, especially those of you that think you can skip the whole semester and then cram the night before the exam and pass. Scientific research tells us it's not possible. When we can only optimally learn in 20 to 30-minute windows, and after maybe an hour, the ability to focus and retain that information begins to degrade at an alarming rate, cramming doesn't work, guys and gals. Sorry. I hate to let you out on the news, but it doesn't. So let me get back to where we were. Optimal learning, 20 to 30-minute windows, and then we need a break. Any longer than 20 to 30 minutes, optimal learning begins to fade. Our focus begins to diminish. Our memory retention starts to waver, and we can actually go through the motions of learning. But after that 20 to 30 window, we're really not learning. So reading is R number one. The second R is rest, and I just touched on why. Going back to that NIH study on learning, here's what we found. Frequent short breaks, 5 to 10 minutes in duration, after a learning lesson allows the brain to do some things. It allows it to organize and consolidate and store the information just learned so that it can be easily recalled. Let me say that again because that's important. A short 5 to 10 minute break after an optimal learning session of 20 to 30 minutes allows the brain to organize, to categorize, and to store information in our brain where it can be easily recalled. That same 5 to 10 minutes also presses the reset button on our brain's ability to focus. So for optimal learning, we should read for 20 to 30 minutes. And then we should rest for 10 minutes or less. I like to say 5 to 10 as optimal. So the first R, read. The second R, rest. The third R, reflect. Successful people throughout history, as I've shared all through today's teaching, maintain an attitude of curiosity. When they sit down with a book, they don't just open the book and start reading. They set their expectations up front, and they start their learning session by priming their mind to learn. What do I mean by that? They ask themselves two questions. The first they ask before they start to read, and this question triggers the reticular activating system. It tells the brain, pay attention to what's coming and prioritize it in the brain's thinking. Here's the first question they ask before they begin to read. It's a question you should ask before you open a book or lean into a podcast or get ready to watch a learning video. What can I learn from what I'm about to read or see or hear? What can I learn from what I'm about to read or see or hear? And then they dive into an optimal learning session of 20 to 30 minutes. Now, the second question they pose is after they finished reading. This second question ignites the brain's curiosity center, and it begins to engage the brain in how thinking, not what is, but what could be. Here's the second question. How can I apply what I just learned to my life so that I can learn, grow, improve, or explore what could be? How can I apply something I just learned so that I can learn something new? I can grow, I can improve, I can get better, or I can explore what could be. Now, successful people have used this very simple three-step method to move beyond failure to achieve immeasurable success. Now, you and I can use this very same approach to move beyond the limited what thinking that we've been trained in all throughout our formal education. It governs our lives, and we can begin to release the shackles that are holding us back from our full potential by engaging in how thinking, and not just exploring the world as it is, but exploring the world in terms of how it could be. So let me leave you with a 30-minute success formula that you can implement starting today, starting right now, that is adapted from the successful individuals I've talked about today. Here's the success formula. Read, rest, and reflect. Number one, read. Start your day every day reading. What do you read? Something informational, something inspirational, something educational, vocational, or historical. Information, inspiration, education, vocation, or history. Read for 20 minutes. So if you can read a whole chapter, great. If you've got to stop at a convenient point in that reading. Maybe it's 22, 23 minutes. That's okay. Stop at a section where a thought is completed in that book you're reading. But 20 minutes of reading. Now from there, I want you to pause for 5 minutes. I want you to take a 5-minute break. Give your brain the opportunity it needs to process, to consolidate, to organize, and to store that information you just took in. When you take that 5-minute break, your brain is going to begin to process that information. Your subconscious mind is going to begin to kick in and say, what can I do with the input I just took into my brain? So what do you do in that 5-minute period of time? Hey, get a drink of water. Sit quietly. Go take a nice leisurely walk in the woods or up and down your neighborhood. Go to the bathroom. Do something where your brain is just at rest. Allow your brain 5 minutes of downtime. And then the third R is reflect. I want you to journal. And we've talked about this in multiple lessons that I've shared through this podcast. Take a journal and for 5 minutes do this. Briefly summarize what you've learned. If you can't summarize all that you've learned in that 5 minutes, summarize one important takeaway that you got from what you read today. And then from that, write down one thing that you're going to apply today from what you learned to grow, to improve, or to explore what could be so that you can remain curious. You want to give yourself 5 minutes to complete that exercise and then move on to start your day. Read for 20, rest for 5, reflect for 5. It's the 25-5 process of moving into a success formula of shifting your brain from what thinking to how thinking. Now, extra for those of you that want to be experts, that want to be world-class masters at doing this, don't just do it in the morning, do it in the evening as well. And if you're just doing it in the evening, do it in the morning as well. If you do it at the start of your day and the end of your day, you're bookending your day. And I've got a complete training on this you'll find in the podcast as well. Remember, bookending your day is a success habit of highly successful people. I talk about it in the Black Belt Secrets of Success. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to do so. It's an incredible read, and it will teach you the 11 principles of highly successful people. So remember, read 20, rest 5, reflect 5. That is the 30-minute success formula for shifting your brain into how thinking and learning how to learn. Now, we talked about an illustrious group of individuals throughout history that have done that. They're part of an eclectic group of highly successful people. Well, guess what? You too can join that eclectic organization if you start today to practice the 3 R's of learning. Hey, I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and I want to say thanks for joining me. Have a great day.